recording.
Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Next Level CX, Exceeding Expectations in a World of Rapid Change. I'd like to extend a thank you to every single one of you joining us today, whether that's with us now live or whether you're watching the recorded session at some point in the future. We're really excited to have all of you with us today. While we wait for those of you who are still joining the webinar, I'm just going to run through some brief housekeeping and an introduction to our fantastic panelists. For those of you whose first time it is joining us today, myself, I'm Scott Cormack, the Global Event Director here at Reuters Events, and it's my pleasure to introduce our exciting panel of leaders today that have joined us to share their expertise and discuss the topic that we have planned today. For the second webinar in a row, we're lucky enough to have a lineup of completely new faces joining us today, and it's always exciting to be able to bring new case studies and expertise to these discussions. Before we kick things off, as I mentioned, just want to run through some brief pieces of housekeeping to make sure that everything runs smoothly. I'm pleased to be joined by hundreds of our community today, all from a different host of countries and exciting brands. To name a few of what I've seen, we have Nike, American Express, Air Canada, Orange, Charles Schwab joining us. It's really exciting to have all of you joining us today. As such, please do let us know using the chat function or the Q&A function that you'll see on the toolbar at the bottom of your screens. If you have any questions that you would like to pose to the panel today, or even any feedback and opinions you have on the topics that we are discussing. We welcome all of your interaction and we'll be sure to incorporate this throughout the webinar. Finally, today's webinar will be recorded, so if you want to revisit any pieces of information from today's discussion, please do keep an eye out for that in your inboxes over the next couple of days. That's all the housekeeping out the way, so it's my pleasure to introduce you to Brian McGuinness, the Senior Vice President of Global Guest Experience and Shared Services from IHG Hotels and Resorts. Also joining us, we have Elyette Roux, the CX Director for Southern Europe from Cisco. Also joining her is Mike Lavigne, Director and Head of Experience Strategy and Design over at Nissan. And finally, Stefanie Kreek, the Senior Product Marketing Manager from today's sponsors, Get Feedback. Thank you all so much for joining us today, and I'm really excited to dive into this discussion. So Brian, starting off with you, why don't you please introduce yourself to our audience today by explaining a little bit about your role at IHG and how that ties to today's topic.
Thanks, Scott, and I'm thrilled to be here today. So thank you for the invite, and thanks for everyone for joining. Over at IHG Hotels and Resorts, as you said, I'm Senior Vice President of the Global Guest Experience. So essentially what we do is we work with the insights team, and then we work with marketing, operations, our brands, and the overall organization on what that guest experience looks like. So is that at the time of booking? Is it through the booking path? Is it when they enter the hotel? When they're in the hotel, and then anything that touches the guest. So that would be amenities, linens, the restaurant experience, the bar experience, and then the branded experience. So we sort of are an end-to-end solution for the total guest experience at IHG.
Perfect. Thanks, Brian. I'm going to go on the order that you guys appear on my screen. So up next, Elyette, why don't you introduce us to your role at Cisco and why you're on today's panel?
Yeah, hi everyone. So a bit like Brian, but with different type of guests. I'm talking about customers for all the connectivity services that we provide worldwide. So my team is in charge of making it easier for our customers to use our technology, to consume our services. And also that when it's time actually to, renew, like you would renew your phone subscription, for instance, then you are so happy to renew that you will continue for, many years together with Cisco. So that's what my team is doing.
Perfect. Thanks, Elyette. And I know you've got some exciting things to dive into with what you're doing over at Cisco later for the discussion. Up next, Mike, I'll put you on the spot. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your role over at Nissan?
Hey, Scott, and hey, everyone. Thanks for having me. Very, very similar to you, Brian, and you, Elyette. Our team at Nissan is responsible for that end-to-end customer experience. So for us, that is as you shop for the car online and at the dealership, after you purchase the car and you're getting to know your car and onboarding, all the way through to ownership and hopefully renewing with Nissan, getting your next Nissan at the end of your ownership life cycle. Through all of that, we're also very focused on how we can operationally put the customer at the center of company decisions. If we're making decisions to improve the experience, how can we translate that type of customer insight and decision-making across the entire company?
Perfect. And I know one of the draws of this panel and why we were so excited to put this on is such a diverse range of industries represented, but all with very similar job roles. So it'll be interesting to see how that sort of compares throughout the discussion. And then finally, Stefanie, why don't you bring us home and explain a little bit about your role at Get Feedback and what you guys do.
Yes, thank you, Scott, for an introduction. And I'm super happy to be here too. It's always inspiring to be surrounded with a lot of CX leaders and to learn from them. Coming from the vendor side of business, we try to support with our CX solution a lot of different organizations, gathering insights from their customers to improve customer experiences across all the different channels. And for me, it's very important to drink our own champagne. We're using our solution to get a better understanding of what organizations need these days. So I'm continuously checking in with a lot of our customers, basically, to get a better understanding what challenges they are facing on a daily basis when it comes to improving experiences and getting a better understanding of customers' expectations. And for that reason, I would like to share also what we see happening in the industry.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Stefanie, and thank you to all the panelists for your great introductions. As I'm sure all the audience members can tell, we've got a wealth of expertise on the panel today, and we're really excited to have you all join us. So thanks for taking the time, and thanks for being willing to share your expertise today. So to kick us off on the discussion, I know that the topic itself is relatively broad. Next level CX can take us down numerous avenues. So one of the things that I wanted to start with was sort of a general question, and do a bit of an around the horn, get an answer from all of you guys. And really starting quite broadly, to get a view of the CX landscape within your respective industries. One of the core points of today was to have that industry case study and really compare between distinct industries. So I know we'll go more into depth in some of these areas later in the discussion, but could you briefly highlight some of the biggest changes that you've seen over the past 12 months within the CX landscape within your respective industries? Elyette, I saw you nodding, so I'm going to come to you first and pick on you.
Yeah, I mean, without any surprise, I mean, everybody has been talking about it for like a year and a half at least. Due to the COVID situation, of course, everything has been accelerating when it comes to, remote work or hybrid workspace, combination of remote work and work on site. So, what we've seen is really the need now for employees to have less friction in the experience that they have along the way, and also have it in a way that is secured, that they are not thinking that, okay, what would I do if I go from my meeting room to my meeting in my room? What is going to happen to my data, to my connectivity? So like bringing a peace of mind that the world of today is not bringing, because it's a lot of uncertainty and things around, technologies and how you make the most out of it. So I guess that this is one of the threads that my colleagues are also working on with the customers and guests. So maybe we can give the floor to, Brian. I see Brian who is smiling. Yes.
Yeah, exactly, Elyette. And I think you raised a really good point. Friction is one of those moments that can be either the employee and or a guest, right? So for us, what we've seen over the last year, number one, obviously, was cleanliness and well-being, right? So because of the pandemic, we had to quickly pivot over those branded experiences. Might be something at the bar or the music we're playing or the way the lobby feels and looks and the design of the property, immediately to cleanliness and well-being. And in that, we had to do it in the booking channel, right? So that frictionless moment, people were booking last minute and explain that, it is safe to come and stay at a hotel. And so we pivoted quickly into that. That being said, even through the pandemic, things were changing, right? It was surface issues at first for transmission, and then it became airborne, right? And so we were quickly cleaning surfaces and demonstrating cleanliness, right? That was important to the guests to say, we used to secretly clean lobbies overnight, and then overnight we had to start cleaning lobbies during the day to show people we were being clean and that the well-being of the customer was front and center for us. So I would say, particularly in the hospitality side or in hotels, it was cleanliness, well-being, and then, to Elyette's point, just make it frictionless. People needed to figure out a way to book, to get into a hotel, and to feel safe.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that you've touched on some great points there. I know for both Elyette and Brian, the things you've said there, we're going to touch on in a little bit more depth further down the discussion. Stefanie, I can see you nodding as well. So what, from your point of view as the vendor side, obviously a slightly different interaction there to Brian, maybe more closely aligned to Elyette and her role at Cisco. But what's been the biggest sort of shift you've seen in the CX landscape over the last sort of 18 months?
Yeah, we saw, of course, also the digital transformation accelerating. A lot of consumers were forced to use digital journeys, digital services of different shops and companies. And what we saw happening was that consumers are less loyal. So it's really easy to switch from one shop to another. Indeed, the effortless shopping is really the goal they have. So we saw a lot of our customers, but also other organizations struggling with, okay, how do I differentiate? How do I make sure that I engage with those customers? And that's where customer experience plays a crucial role. And things are moving fast these days. So we see also from a very technical perspective that you need to make the changes rapidly as an organization to understand what your customers need and to build the services digitally, what they really love and like and embrace. So things are moving fast and things are, for us, changed in a more customer-centric way as well. A lot of organizations have this as one of the biggest topics right now to gain that competitive advantage.
Yeah, for sure. And you sort of took the words out of my mouth there. I know one of the core points of the discussion today is how do we gain that competitive edge and where CX plays that crucial part in that. So that's something, again, that we'll touch on in the coming discussion. But I want to come around to you, Mike, waiting patiently for your answer. But yeah, what's the biggest change that you guys have seen over at Nissan and within the automobile industry?
Stefanie, I think you really hit it on the head. And we are one of the industries in automotive where a lot of interactions that had previously been happening for many people or most people in physical spaces started to move online. As everyone probably knows, thinking back to your own car shopping experience, we are one of those industries when the first thing that comes to your mind, the mental model is, I'm going to go in, I'm going to sit down with someone, I'm going to spend an afternoon, and I'm going to find my car that way. And when we started to experience first government lockdowns and our dealer network closure, but then even later on, when things were opening up, more hesitancy and more kind of customer behavior indicating that they want to have that choice. They may not want to go in and do things exactly as they did before. We knew quite early on that we had no choice but to really accelerate our transformation to digital and bring more and more of that experience that customers were looking for to shop for the car online, but then not cut off completely from physical. So it wasn't a shift from physical to online. It was adding that online journey and making sure that that online journey works really seamlessly with our physical journey. And customers are able to move back and forth as much as they want, choose to take interactions in different sides of it if they want. So that's been a big transformation for us over the last year to respond to that customer call for more freedom to choose how they want to do this sort of experience.
Yeah, for sure. And I know that having a discussion with you earlier in the week, Mike, ahead of this webinar, that's what has born the Nissan at Home program, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and that was based off of an initial sort of customer expectation around that shift to digital. So was that really an insight-driven program that was born out of that customer feedback and insight?
Yeah, it quite was. We saw the data very early on indicating that we had a significant drop in traffic to our websites, which may have been expected. In most markets, our dealer networks were closed. But for the people who were still shopping online, they were actually going quite deep at a much higher rate than normal. So there was a subset of our customers who was very persistent and still really wanted to buy the car at that time in their life, even though there were some barriers with network closures. And what we would see as we started to look at the data on these customer journeys was they would fall out. They would reach to a certain point where usually at a point where they might have handed off to talk to someone in person or go see someone in person, that we could no longer help them. So we started the Nissan at Home program looking at those fallout points in the customer journey and say, here's where we really need to start and create those bridges so the customer can continue and take that next step or that next action online. And for us, Nissan at Home has been both building out the experience and communicating about it, because there's been a lot of mental model shifts, I think, in many categories, including automotive. And we're offering new services, as I'm sure IHG and Cisco and Get Feedback, you're probably offering new services that you weren't a year ago. But if customers don't know about those services and don't know they can interact with the brand in the new way, then things can fall flat there too. So we've been really persistent since launching Nissan at Home to create that really strong journey that they can shop as online as they want, as physical as they want, move between the two, but also know that they can interact in the new ways.
Yeah, for sure. And I wanted to tie that before we come around to the other panelists as well. We've had a question come through in the Q&A box, specifically for you, Micah, and what you've just been talking about there. That's asking, when you're creating these new journeys and digital journeys to match the in-person journeys, how do you execute those seamlessly and make sure that you don't miss the mark when time is against you? So I suppose the crux of that is how do you create these seamless journeys, but have that agility in mind and that speed to keep up with the customer demands?
Yeah, it's a great question. Comes down to the organizational loop and how we work, I suppose. So we try to work, as I'm sure many of you in the attendees or the panelists do, in a quite iterative fashion. So we look at the data, we see where the hole in the road is that people are falling out, we need to fix. We design that new service or feature that's going to help fill that hole. And as we're designing it, we're testing it with customers, even as flat as flat design, pieces of paper type of thing, so that by the time that we get to launch that feature live, we're pretty confident. And if we're wrong, even after all that confidence, and it doesn't work as well, then we're ready to keep kind of iterating it and improving it the next time. So I think having the, what really helps is having the team at the ready with the skills and the mindset to do that type of really quick execution. We really, it was amazing. The company, in face of a lot of challenges and personal challenges, people as well, really came together under the banner of Nissan at Home last year. But then also having the narrow focus. You can't fix everything all at once. That will really slow you down if you try to do this. So having that quite narrow focus to create the most value.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you guys, and from my conversations with you and what you've just spoke about there, the Nissan at Home program is a really fantastic blend of that retail and digital space. And the way that you guys have done that is really commendable. Brian, I want to come on to something that myself and you spoke about in the run up to this webinar that ties in with what Mike's just spoke about there. So I know that when we spoke at length about IHG's CX strategy being grounded in the data collection and the utilization, and how that naturally leads on to how IHG refine the customer experience from that data. So can you tell us a little bit how that's worked for you guys over the last 18 months? And obviously you as a similar sort of, you still have the retail space and the physical space, and that's very much the bread and butter of what you do. So how has that dynamic worked for you over the last 18 months?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Scott. So just to lift off of something that Mike said, though, I think it's critical as we think about the insights that we get is how we package it, right? And how brilliantly Nissan at Home was. So you actually understand that program. And I think if we learned anything over the last, 12, 14, 16, 18 months, is things are changing so rapidly. And there was a lot of data out there. It was really confusing, right? It was confusing to me. It was confusing to the consumer, right? And so similarly, we took those insights and said, we can't just list on our website or in our app or anything on any of our channels the protocols we're taking in and around well-being and clean. We had to package it up, launch IHG Way of Clean. It was digestible, the consumer, the customer, and the owner, because we also have that other piece, right? A critical piece to us. We have, thousands of owners of these hotels globally, so that they could really understand what we were doing. So simple steps, here's what it is. Here's what the program is. IHG Way of Clean, and our clean promise will guarantee your well-being at the property. That being said, I think Mike also, talked a little bit about speed to market and being nimble, taking the insights that we're actually getting and saying, okay, we may need to change this, right? It's 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, right? We may need to change on the fly and do it. And what we actually learned was, we kind of had to do it internally to some degree as well, right? We found new skill sets with some of our employees, because guess what? We couldn't have an agency come in and do a pitch and do 30, 60, 90 days of exploration and mood boards and look at creative, whether it was 2D or 3D or whatever we were doing. But we actually had to say, oh, by the way, Heather, can you shoot a video for us? Because we need it tomorrow, and we need to reassure the consumer that, well-being is top of mind for us. So I think, packaging it is critical, digestible information, particularly in an uncertain time, and then speed to market and leveraging the enterprise that you're in to come together to bring that holistic experience, I think was critical for us.
Yeah, for sure. And Stefanie, I know I get feedback. You guys, customer insight is the baseline of what you guys do. So how does that sort of translate, and what have you seen in that can give people the edge with those consumer insights, and how that translates into more refined CX strategy?
Yeah, it's interesting what Brian already mentioned. It's a cross-functional effort. Collecting data is step one, basically, and that's what a lot of organizations do these days, whether it's just a simple score or open text. I think a lot of organizations have tons of data about their customers, but a lot of organizations forget that you need to have resources also to take care, to analyze, and to indeed focus, what Mike addressed, on what is important in your organization and where basically the most crucial improvements need to be made. And what we see is that's always a combination between the people, the processes, and the technology that you have in place to ensure that there are indeed the internal loops, and also closing the loop with the customer to ensure that you have that value resource available continuously. That's what we see happening a lot, that like, oh, I have a bunch of data and I don't know how to gather that. So that's where we, at least at Get Feedback, took a step last year to improve the way you could analyze the data with our product, and to make sure that you have that holistic customer view in just one place. But we see indeed a lot of organizations struggle with, okay, I need to implement fast. I need to make sure that everyone is aligned. So that internal buy-in is also a very crucial step in your CX improvements. You need to make sure that management is aligned with what you're executing on. It's a whole company effort, basically.
Yeah, for sure. And Elyette, I want to come to you, because this is something that we spoke about in our conversation. Was you were describing that Cisco's focus is very much around that sort of, what's the next steps from that baseline? Once we have the information, once we have the sort of idea of what our customers want, what are the next steps there? So can you tell us a little bit about what processes, tools that Cisco have undertaken?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's actually an innovation process that we do with our teams without them being called innovation teams, because actually most of my teams are around what we call customer success. But it's basically putting in place a lot of testing, like Stefanie just mentioned. You need to test things fast to see if it works or not. So basically, in my case, I'm overseeing 8 countries in South Europe. So the experience of the customers is quite different, or expected to be different from one country to another, especially starting with the language, So basically, one of the things that we do is that we let the autonomy to the teams in their own employee experience to actually test and try things that they feel work with the customer. And if it actually works, then we check whether we can scale at the country level or at the region level or globally. And I think that this, way of giving the opportunity to non-innovation teams, but to do innovation on the customer experience and to test it, then is actually a great way to get faster the value to the customer.
Yeah, for sure. And that conversation that I had with you and what you've just said there really reminded me of a conversation that we had in one of our sessions at the June flagship event that just happened, where one of the speakers was talking about they were talking about voice of the customer, but the next step to that being voice of the employee, and the employee being a real goldmine for insight that's often overlooked. Obviously, as the front lines of your organization's sort of interactions with customers, they are really well placed to know what sort of things can help refine that process. And Elyette, I know that you guys are putting a really big emphasis on employee experience, how to improve that, and how to streamline that process. Do any of the rest of you guys have anything to add there? Mike, Brian, is there anything you guys are doing on the employee side? Obviously, Brian, I know you mentioned the owner aspect as well. Mike, you guys have that with franchisees, right? So is there anything that you guys have there where your employees or your owners are giving you another source of insight and feedback that's helping you refine CX strategy?
Sorry, I can take it. Sure, we are actually we're on both sides, right? Certainly at our employees, and they have been our frontline workers, right? And so we have been super sensitive to their care and well-being through all of this, right? And actually asking them, what will make you feel comfortable while at work? Is that temperature checks and health checks upon arrival? Is that PPE and face masks? Is it putting up plexiglass, which is the last thing we want to do in hospitality, right? Is put up a barrier between ourselves and our guests at the front office and then at the front desk. But they told us they needed that, right? And if they're coming to work every day, front line through a pandemic, we need to do exactly what our associates needed to make them comfortable and have them be able to service our guests. And then similarly, just listening to the owners, right? It was a very difficult last year and a half from a financial perspective. And we were asking them to spend additional money, right? New protocols, new cleaning supplies, new ways of working, double, triple, quadruple clean. And then there were all sorts of things that were coming at us from different directions, electrostatic sprayers, different ways of wiping and cleaning, et cetera, taking rooms out of order for 72 hours between guests. And so it was really a listening post that we needed to say, strike the right balance, right? We have to be certain that we're meeting the needs of the customer, we're meeting the needs of our associates, but at the same time, meeting the needs of the owners. And again, I think Stefanie said it really well. From an enterprise-wide solution, it's got to be holistic. Everyone's got to be aligned. Everybody's got to be on board. And once you establish that, you can move it forward pretty quickly. And I've got to say, I think in general, the hotel industry did a pretty good job over the last 18 months collectively, because we also worked with each other, right? AHLA is the hotel association that we all worked with, and we would align in advance and look at protocols and the way our owners, our operators, and our guests were giving us that feedback. So, communication's key.
Yeah, for sure. And Mike, do you have anything to add there? Obviously, a similar sort of dynamic with your owners and the franchisees of the Nissan business. Is there any crucial insights they gave you that allowed you to be nimble and agile in response to the last 18 months?
Yeah, extremely similar. You can almost take what you've said, Brian, to a T and substitute in dealership owners and employees. But I think one thing to add, or one specific insight that they've helped us, especially in the last year, to improve for the customer experience, is we are managing, as customers spend time shopping online, and over the past year spend more and more time shopping online, there's information that they choose to share that they're looking for us to use to help them on the next steps of their journey. Like if they are looking at a certain car with a certain build and accessories and color, they really want that to carry through into the next step of their shopping experience, even if that means they're now leaving the online space and entering the physical space. So we've worked really closely with our dealers to co-create on some of these digital features that hand off to physical. One example is the personal showroom, very similar to what I was saying. If you go in and you build a couple of cars, you're comparing between, and you can take that whole showroom and send that from online directly to the dealer, that when you sit down with them, they're now looking at that same set of cars that you built, and you can pick up the conversation from there. There's some features or parts of the experience like that, especially at that intersection of digital to physical and back again, that it's been really critical to co-create with dealer owners and employees.
Yeah, I think what we can take from everything that you guys have said so far is that the wealth of insights doesn't just start and finish with the customer. I think that's one key takeaway, is that the insights can be so critical to the overall CX strategy and how we refine those and make them more seamless when we look to these different angles. Obviously, not everyone has owners or franchisees, but even Elyette, with you at Cisco, your employees are such a goldmine of that insight and how they can transform that strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we are mostly B2B, even if on our collaboration WebEx offering, this is B2B2C. So let's say on the B2B side, it's clear that same as what Brian and Mike explained, there is a whole listening of the employees that have been put in place, like rituals and tools, and also everything that is to close the feedback loop. So you listen, then you take it into account, and then what do you do with that? It's another gold mine of insight that you can leverage in order to bringing back in the rest of the organization. And I think that this is where, the best, or in the way we can really improve this experience of the employee, then we can also improve the experience of the customer. Stefanie mentioned it, it's about also eating your own food or drinking your own champagne. So we do that also in Cisco. And this is very much important, because then we can really speak for ourselves as the own customer shoes that the customer needs to hear sometimes, like, have you already tested it for yourself? Yes, we did. So this is very important for like we discussed in the beginning, decreasing the friction, simplifying the experience, and also giving new possibilities that sometimes the customer don't even think that they can get. For instance, in the world of hotels or car dealership, that's for sure. So I guess that this is a new world also opening of possibilities for my colleagues.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you summed it up really well in one of the chats we had, Elyette. And it was about being able to put your best people in front of your customer and provide that customer experience at every interaction, making sure that they have the tools, the processes, anything that they need to be able to deliver on that every time without fail. So I really like that. Stefanie, there's a question in the Q&A box that I'd want to come to you with, because it's something that we spoke about and something you were very keen to touch on within this discussion, was around customer feedback and how it's obviously, like David has said, not guaranteed. So how do you rapidly get feedback on the efficacy of the CX offering? How do you measure how successful your CX strategy is being?
Yeah, that's a great question. And indeed, feedback is not guaranteed. With our solution, it's not only the passive feedback button, as we call it, where visitors of websites and apps can leave feedback, but there's also an active way of asking for feedback. So with kind of micro surveys, we all know these kind of long surveys we used to have in the past with measuring the quality of services. With over 30 questions. That's a little bit traditional. I think with microservice, you get a very great idea and quick insight in how the experience at that moment is. But indeed, for organizations, it's quite important to understand what is the base level, what is the status of your customer experience right now. So you need to decide internally what type of metric you're using to check in with the quality of your experience. A lot of organizations are using an NPS as their standard, combined obviously with all their operational data. But you can think of customer effort score when you're improving certain interactions digitally. Customer satisfaction is a quite common one to understand indeed what is the current level and am I improving? If you're making a lot of changes, as Brian also emphasized, they pivot basically the entire way of working, and you can imagine that your guests have an opinion about that. Is it indeed an improvement for them, or are they still struggling with something? And that doesn't matter if you're buying a car or buying online clothes, for example. You need to understand what the expectations are and if you meet them. And what I always advise to organizations is to make sure that if you have that centric metric you're using to emphasize on your customer experience and showcase the quality, to embed it in all the board meetings you have, showcasing leadership, taking care of that as well, to understand the importance, because it's, as just discussed with all of us, quite an investment for an organization, not only talking about the technology, but also about all the resources and processes you need to have in place and continuously pivot to make sure this happens. So please make sure you have your standard metric in the organization, create that internal benchmark, and ensure that it's acknowledged by leadership.
Yeah, for sure. And Mike, I want to come to you because this is something that you touched on as well, and you have quite unique way of measuring your CX success within Nissan. So why don't you tell us a little bit how that works and how that ties in with your overall sort of sales as well?
Yeah, it's everything that you were saying just now, Stefanie, really resonates with me and with some of the experience that we've been through. We've gone through that exercise, and it's really been tightening and tightening over time of working with our senior leadership in the C-suite to define and agree on what is the value of customer experience and in relationship to the business, and how can we measure that very concretely. So there are, of course, like many KPIs that we track to understand customer engagement and satisfaction. But the one KPI that we've elevated and we've really agreed with our senior executives is going to be the main one for the shopper experience, is what we call digitally influenced sales. And it's based around the premise that if we create the best shopping experience for customers online, and they're getting exactly what they need to do, and it's so easy, and we bring that signature Nissan excitement to the online shopping experience with them, they're going to stick around and they're going to keep shopping. And if we can do that well over time, more and more of our total sales should be coming from digital, because we know that we're able to meet their needs and move them on to a sale, whether they're buying that car completely online or they're shopping online and then buying the car at the dealership. So digital sales are the key metric that we use that's been elevated to a corporate KPI and is included in all our financial reports, that of what percentage of all of our total sales are coming from digital.
Perfect. And I think that's a really interesting way to look at it. And obviously, it, like you say, measures the success of those digital channels. And as we've talked about previously, the wealth of insights available of customers who are now preferring those digital channels and are pushing for those more. Elyette, that's something that I'd like to come around to you for. Obviously, Cisco is a technology company, and I know you as well are a real sort of driver of digital transformation. So in that regard, what have you seen in terms of customers being driven more towards digital channels, and also your customers at Cisco obviously pushing their own digital transformations and you helping them within that?
Yeah, you are touching upon one thing, which is that we, in IT are, let's say, linked to a complex ecosystem, between the customer and all what we call go-to-market, or that we are leveraging in order to reach to the customer. And what we've seen is that in order for us at Cisco to help the customer in their own digital transformation, we had also not only to digitize ourselves, but also to help the ecosystem digitize. And this is something that we've been working on now for a few years. And this is back to, again, the culture and how we put the customer at the center. So we could think that, we are coming from kind of product-centric type of culture, which we've tried to change in order to put the customer at the center with the value that we can bring to the customer. And it has to be brought by everyone, not only Cisco, but also our partners. So we are talking about many different initiatives, not only in the way we drive lifecycle management, like it was mentioned by Mike earlier, with our ecosystem, but also how we help simplify the click and buy experience, because even in the IT B2B world, we also do have a click and buy experience. And we are kind of, let's say, late when it comes to this experience versus what you can find in B2C. So from a B2B perspective, we are catching up, and it's quite interesting because many things have already been done. So the challenge for us is, how can we learn very fast what has been done before, what is working, what is not working, what can we apply, what is actually not working for B2B. And what we did realize that many of the things that have been done in B2C can apply to B2B. So it's a very interesting world where we are, thank you guys, taking the lessons of what you are doing in your industries. And this is very cool for the teams.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that sort of speaks to CX as a whole, right? CX isn't particularly tied to one particular industry. We can all learn from each other. And that's why panels like this are so great. Obviously, automotive, technology, hospitality, travel, whatever it may be, we can all learn from each other and use those same things that apply across the board and can improve experiences as a whole. So in terms of that, I want to go back to something that we touched on in the last round of questions, and I kept it in my mind to revisit. It's something that I spoke with most of you about in the prep calls for this webinar, and it was one of the key things that has come out of the last couple of years, and as CX has sort of pushed itself into the heart of business strategy, is how do you sort of gain the organization-wide buy-in there, and how is CX structured within your own organizations? Is it sort of in its own lane, obviously where it's a relatively new area that's really getting recognition? Teams are having to carve out positions and teams dedicated to CX. So just at the event last June, just start of this month, I'm losing my time, one of the chief customer officers that was speaking there was a new chief customer officer who'd only been in the role for 2 years, but the role had only existed for 2 years. So what does CX look like within your organizations? Stefanie, I'll start with you in terms of your customers. Who do you generally work with, and how is CX structured within your partners? I can imagine you see quite a varied level of how that's structured across companies.
Yeah, definitely. In a lot of organizations, customer experience is getting more and more important, and a lot of organizations create dedicated teams for customer experience. But also in research that we did last year, we saw that there are a lot of organizations that have just one single person taking care of customer experience. And in that way, it's quite difficult to get that buy-in and to make sure that you have all your ducks in a row and everyone is executing in the same way. Technology definitely can help in that sense, but it's more indeed the buy-in that you need to have from leadership to make sure that there are common goals for every department to look into customer experience, and everyone is reporting in the same way. I think that's where it all starts. If we talk about how we organize, because we're drinking our own champagne, how we organize ourselves, so we have a dedicated leader, Christine Reimer, taking care of customer experience at Momentive currently. And she's collaborating, of course, with all the stakeholders internally to ensure that we're measuring continuously. Speaking for the Get Feedback product ourselves, for example, we collect feedback on a daily basis, and all our product managers are held accountable to respond to feedback that we collect, and also to take care of the measurement of how our product is evolving. Are we improving indeed, or are new features and functionalities never used and frustrating our end users? So we keep a continuous loop on feedback. And I saw a quick question in Q&A like, what, is there ever enough feedback? No, feedback is a continuous cycle. And as said, consumers are moving so fast these days that every information that you gathered last month might not be relevant anymore today. So I would definitely recommend everyone to continuously keep a pulse on what your customers expect from you from a service level point of view.
Yeah, for sure. And obviously that's critical for obviously moving away from being reactive and moving into a mode of being proactive, which is critical going forward. And as the webinar is titled, not just meeting expectations but exceeding them. Brian, I'll come to you next, because I know that we had Claire Bennett from IHG speak at our event at the start of the month. How is CX real structured within IHG? And obviously you guys have a real focus on it, and a renewed focus on it in the hotel industry, and it's the key role that it's playing in customer retention and customer loyalty moving out of the pandemic.
Yeah, and we have a pretty robust organization in and around customer centricity. And what I would say is the first thing is we tie it to revenue and revenue generation. So that gets everyone really excited about it, as well as an improved guest experience, right? And we can tie the two together. So improved guest experience, improved owner experience, drive revenue, you've got the trifecta. So that's really how we position it. And if we have to bring it to the board, that's how we look at it. From a structural perspective, obviously we have Claire Bennett, she's our Chief Customer Officer in pushing customer centricity at every step of the organization. So our data and analytics and our customer insights team is a shared service. So it's utilized by operations, by brand, by the customer experience team, and a host of others, whether it's regional or it's global. And so truly what they're doing is harmonizing the information in the data, I think to Stefanie's earlier point, so that we get alignment moving forward, right? So that we don't have multiple reports with multiple outputs, that we're all looking at the same data and we're saying, okay, this might be something, like a seasonal cocktail refresh. And if we were going to do that as a guest experience, that may be the umbrella, but how are we going to execute that in Hawaii versus in Hong Kong versus in Havana, right? And it might be something different in each of those markets, but it's still under the umbrella of a seasonal cocktail refresh, right? So we're actually looking at the data, we're looking at the micro data and saying, okay, how are we going to bring this to life? What is the new next generation guest experience? But how can we also regionalize that and make it sense for the operation and make sense for the owners, right? We have that other constituency as well to be certain that we're balancing all of these things. So a shared service, complete alignment within the organization, create that North Star, tie it back to revenue generation and improved guest experience.
Yeah, for sure. And Elyette, I know that that was something you spoke about at the start, was that sort of regional difficulty, especially in Europe, Southern Europe, where we've got a lot of countries with different languages, different cultures. How does that work with you? And how does that sort of CX structure sit within Cisco?
Yeah, so first of all, the CX organization was created like 2.5 years ago, and it was not existing actually, but it's starting from the top because it was included into the executive committee as a function, and then merge with existing traditional organizations like operations and services. So in a way, it's really like getting completely transversal, as Brian explained, and also as such, we created completely new roles like the ones that I have in my team, which are called customer success. So this is in fact thanks to that we have a mix between a global umbrella and a local flavor of it. So again, I'm so impressed that we are basically speaking the same vocabulary, despite the fact that we are not at all in the same industry. But this is how we do it. And the thing is that we have to get closer and closer to the customer needs in a proactive way and not just in a reactive way. And at the same time, there are many things that can be centralized in order to accelerate all this. So this is how we do it. And I would say that for now it's working well. And we hope to continue also thanks to the scale that we have with the ecosystem that I was telling about. And, our partners are on board. So yeah. It's an exciting world of acceleration. We have to cope with it and pick up the speed.
Yeah, for sure. And everyone's touched on something that me and you spoke about, Mike, and it was how CX is structured within Nissan. And you spoke about a global CX team really being driven by the key customer journeys and the key interactions with the brand that your customers have. And at its essence, it's very cross-functional, where CX can sit within all these different areas that everyone has mentioned: operations, marketing, customer engagement, whatever it may be. CX sits at the heart of all of those at the moment. So can you tell us a little bit how that works for you and what successes that's allowed you to have within your CX strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. We've followed a really similar journey that it sounds like the rest of you have, and taking that similar approach where CX by its definition must be extremely cross-functional because every function inside the company, more or less, is going to be interacting with the customer. But then how do you can't have CX be the whole company. So how do you create that function that has that right balance of interaction with all the functions, but also ability to move forward as its own group? So historically at Nissan, going farther back, customer experience was a marketing function. It was more or less the same thing as running the web experiences. But we started realizing that we were hitting all sorts of barriers. We tried to touch other parts of the customer journey. So what we did was going through and getting alignment with all of the functional heads of some of our major business units, including our sales business unit or our after sales service business unit. We all kind of acknowledge this common problem, and what CE means at Nissan today was born out of this. And it was a structure that is, so we're a global team, and we work with all of the functions. And in order to break out of those functional silos, we're structured around, as you said, these customer journeys. So through customer research, we pulled out what are the 7 most important things that a customer needs to get done with Nissan at some point in their journey. So they're all named for that action. So choosing my vehicle is one, experiencing a test drive is another, making my finance decisions, onboarding to ownership, managing my daily drive, et cetera, But you get the point that these are all based around these discrete customer needs that they need to achieve, regardless of which channel they're interacting with. Each of those journeys is led by a journey manager, who is, they're a mix of people from CE and from the functions that are all participating as these journey managers. And the members working on these journeys are all completely cross-functional. So that kind of balanced structure between having a centralized team of CE roles and skills that contributes to these journey teams, that's worked really well for us. It's allowed us to clear out some barriers that we otherwise had hit when we want to improve a certain part of the experience. We're no longer kind of searching down which corner of the market, or sorry, the company is interacting with this part of the journey. It's all built into those journey teams. And we've got a parallel structure, as you were saying, Elyette, I think as well at Cisco, between the global team and market teams against these journeys. So we have that through line from the central changes and improvements that we're making to the journeys to the local interpretations and adaptations and customizations.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that sounds great in terms of one of, like I mentioned at the start, the sort of barrier to CX that could potentially be there for a company that doesn't have it carved out, is that it is so cross-team, cross-functional, and being able to locate and connect those points and connect those dots could be a real difficulty. So I really like that idea of sort of breaking it down into those key interactions and managing it from there. Stefanie, I want to come to you with a question, because I know we're running to the top of the hour now. So I wanted to finish up with a couple of questions, and one of them was one that we spoke about, quite broad, quite overarching, but real sort of focused on the actionable takeaways for the audience members. So it would be, if you were to give one piece of advice to companies who are just starting out on their CX journeys, or they're in the early stages of that, where would you advise them to start, and what specific pieces of advice from what you've seen and your guys' expertise would you sort of forward onto them?
Yeah, that's a great question. Question that I get quite often, to be honest. A lot of organizations are starting with customer feedback, with measuring customer experiences, whether it's indeed with just a metric or open text. And like Elyette already perfectly answered earlier during this session, it starts with data collection, but then you need to indeed make sure that you're analyzing your feedback, analyzing the data, combine it with the sources you currently already have. Specifically, if we talk about digital interactions, there is a lot of analytics data already available in your organization. And if you're collecting feedback or certain CX scores, it's already on top of that. So make sure that you have that holistic view indeed, to make sure that you understand where to take action, and create basically interactions with existing workflows to ensure that your teams are following up and taking care. Because from my experience, there are a lot of teams that need to be taken care. If you receive feedback about certain interactions, that can be about the content, it can be about the imagery on your website, it can be about a service agent that was not able to answer the questions in a right way. So to make sure that you're able to interact internally, you need to make use of existing workflows and use the systems you're already working in, like a CRM system or Jira, for example, if you talk about product teams, to make sure that they don't need to log in other technologies to do their work and to make those improvements. And closing the loop with a customer is also a very important one, to ensure that you have that resource available 24/7. If you never reply, and I think everyone can tell that if you are really complaining about something and being frustrated, how cool is it that you get a response of the organization like, "I'm sorry, we're really taking care of this. It's great feedback." And I can imagine that for organizations, it's not applicable to reply to every feedback item that they get, but try to connect with your audience on a regular basis. And indeed, get the buy-in from your leaders and make sure that you're all aligned on what metrics to measure, because that was one of the questions we just got in the Q&A as well. You need to make sure that you are measuring across the organization in the same way. Otherwise, it's never an holistic, you're never able to create that holistic view and see where gaps are in your customer journeys and where you need to improve and which part of journeys are maybe a little bit behind or doing fantastic, where you need to learn from. So make sure that indeed you have the buy-in, have an alignment on metrics, and combine the existing data in your organization. Because it's not only about customer feedback when it comes to customer experience. There's a lot other data that can help to create that holistic view.
Yeah, for sure. I think that question sort of led us into a really nice summation of the whole discussion that we've had today. We've touched on all of those points at some point in this discussion. So the first piece of advice would, I suppose, be come and watch this webinar. But in terms of we've got sort of 2 to 3 minutes before we hit the top of the hour. So I just want to do a really quick around the horn for all of you guys. And really simply, obviously, we are talking about next level CX and how we exceed customer expectations. But moving through half two and into 2022, I know forecasting can be a little bit dangerous at the moment, where we're moving really quickly, and we've all said that CX moves at a crazy rate of knots at the moment. But at the moment, what do you foresee to be the biggest challenge or trend or opportunity within CX moving into the next year? So Brian, I'll start with you. I'll put you on the hot seat first. It can be industry related to you specifically, or it can be a wider one. What do you foresee to be a challenge or opportunity that's really going to come to the focus in 2022?
Well, the first thing I would suggest to the panel, as well as myself, and I practice this in those that are attending, is breathe, right? We might just need to take a step back. It's been a really long 18 plus months and whatever that is. And so I would suggest breathe. I would suggest some rapid review of the data. And really look before you jump, right? And I think as we enter rapid recovery, and we are in that now, one of the biggest challenges we have is the consumer expectation changing very rapidly. Our booking windows are shorter. People are out and about. They have been locked up for an extended period of time. They are in it to win it. And we just have to be certain that we're addressing those needs now, but keeping the flexibility that we can pivot moving forward if we get back to whatever the new normal is, if you get back to a new normal. But I'd encourage some deep breaths.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of nodding from the panelists, so I think you've hit the nail on the head there. Elyette, I'll come to you next.
I was going to say pause before you jump, but it sounds like a breathing exercise. So in our industry, let's say we see and we know that there is a huge move to the cloud. So really for us in Cisco, it's how we really get close to our customers into what they want to achieve. And also that we help them design the future, because sometimes, we think that the future is just a projection of what you experience now, but in fact, the future can be completely different. So to help reinvent the future, pivoting or doing any type of innovation in terms of business model is what we need to achieve. And for that, we need to have great, healthy, engaged people. So I'm back to, take a pause before jumping.
I'm starting to see a theme emerge here, but Mike, I'll come to you. If you want to do another sort of breathing exercise acronym, we can go for that.
Fully agree on the deep breath. Another one that we're thinking about and working on quite actively that I think will become more and more important is the intersection between brand and CX. So a lot of the focus in CX is very justifiably on removing friction and increasing functionality. All of us work, though, as well in extremely competitive industries where there's not just one or two, but many, many competitors out there. And as all of the competitors in a field are getting smarter and smarter about CX, it becomes less and less about removing that friction in the customer journey and more about finding those moments in the customer journey to communicate your unique brand and bring a sort of emotional energy and emotional resonance to those interactions. So we're looking at how do we bring what we call Nissan-ness, that energy and excitement that we have in the cars that you feel if you drive them. How do we bring that to our digital channels? So that intersection of injecting that brand excitement, even in these very functional experiences, I think is part of the next big frontier in CX.
Yeah, for sure. I love that, and being able to weave that brand identity throughout CX, I think is a great step, and a logical one. If you can figure out how to put Nissan-ness into a digital channel. Stefanie, finally to wrap us up, in terms of challenge or opportunity that you see as coming to the forefront in 2022, what do you think?
Yeah, I think I totally agree with the other panelists. We definitely need to take a breather to recover a little bit from what just happened. We've seen that things change fast. We acknowledge that during this session. And I think that also forces a lot of organizations to look for pretty short-term solutions. And I think now it's also the time to take a look back and see what the strategy will be moving forward for the more longer term. Although longer term is quite a flexible topic, I would suggest not to look for now till 10 years, but just for the next year at least to define the strategy and to make sure that you all aligned on what are the goals that we would like to achieve from a customer experience perspective, but also in general with the organizations. I think that's a great way to kick off the year. And some challenges, yeah, we'll never know what happened, right? Never thought that we would be in a pandemic. So I'm curious to see what 2022 will bring us.
Yeah, definitely. That does wrap us up for today. So I suppose in summation, we should all just take a deep breath. But I know we have covered a lot of ground today, and we've discussed some incredibly important topics. There was fantastic insights up and down the panel today. So I want to give a real big thank you to both Brian, Elyette, Stefanie, and Mike. I want to extend a massive thank you for lending us your time and expertise today. I really enjoyed the discussion. Finally, I'd also like to thank today's sponsors, Get Feedback and Stefanie, for working with us to create this hugely successful webinar. If you would like to go and check out what they have to offer and some of the things that Stefanie spoke about today, please head over to www.getfeedback.com or look out for more information that will be attached alongside the recording of today's webinars that you'll receive. And last but not least, I would like to thank each and every one of you who joined us live today or will be listening on demand. I hope you enjoyed the discussion and gained some actionable takeaways. Finally, for those of you who missed it in the last week, we have launched our end-of-year flagship event, Customer Service and Experience Global, which is due to take place on October 5th and 6th. For this event, we're offering free limited access passes exclusively to end users, which will grant you access to the live stream of content, as well as access to exclusive roundtable sessions throughout day 2. If you would like to find out more, please head over to our hub site now to explore the event, view the first confirmed speakers that will be sharing their expertise, and apply to attend this business critical event later this year. But for now, thank you from all of us at Reuters Events. Thank you to our great panel, and have a great day, everyone. I'll see you soon. Bye.
Thank you.